For the third night in a row, the motion sensor cameras inside the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center stayed active. Claire Donovan, head caretaker at Pine Hollow Rescue, stared at the screen, her brows furrowed. In the far corner of the enclosure, the young Bobcat hadn't moved an inch. She lay curled tight against the wall, trembling despite the heating lamps. Her eyes, large, amber, and unblinking, never close. Not even once. The team had tried everything: thermal blankets, soft classical music, synthetic pheromones, even a fleece plush shaped like a mother bobcat. Nothing worked. She hasn't eaten. Not even touched the water, Claire whispered to Dr. Lucas Bennett, the on-call vet. If this keeps up, Lucas didn't need her to finish. He had already seen the blood test results. Malnourished, hypothermic, cortisol levels through the roof. This little bobcat, barely 6 months old, was shutting down, and she had every reason to. She was found 3 days ago by a hiker near the state line, lying motionless under a fallen pine, half buried in snow. The man had followed a trail of dark red blotches for nearly a mile before finding her. The bobcat had tried to drag herself away from something, no one knew what. But her back left leg was mangled, bone exposed, likely a poacher's trap. She should have been dead from blood loss. Lucas had stabilized her. Miraculously, she'd survived the surgery. They named her Ember after the flicker of life still glowing behind her terrified eyes. But now, 3 nights in, that ember was dimming. Outside wind howled across the snowy plain, rattling the wooden shutters. Claire stood from the monitor desk and pulled her jacket tight. "I'm going to check on her," she said. "Take Benny with you," Lucas replied without looking up. Claire turned. "Why?" Lucas shrugged. "He's been pacing near the door all night. Maybe he knows something we don't. Benny, the center's 5-year-old golden retriever, wasn't a therapy dog by certification, but he had the heart of one. Ever since Claire rescued him as a stray during a wildfire evacuation 2 years ago, he had taken on a quiet guardian role. Injured deer, orphaned raccoons, even one traumatized moose calf, Benny had been their silent comfort." Claire hesitated. "She's a bobcat, Lucas. She might lunge." "She's not even moving," he said. "Just try." So she did. As Claire walked down the corridor, Benny followed without a leash, his steps steady on the cold floor. She opened the viewing hatch quietly. Ember didn't flinch. Then Claire opened the main door, and Benny stepped inside. Benny padded in slowly, his thick golden coat catching the soft glow from the red heat lamp. He didn't bark or whine. He didn't even make a sound. He simply sat, several feet from the injured bobcat, and lowered his head to the floor in silence. Ember didn't move at first. Claire watched from behind the safety glass, her hand hovering over the tranquilizer button just in case. The wildcat's body was still coiled in tension, her chest barely rising beneath the thick bandage on her ribs. But then, after 3 sleepless nights, she blinked. It was a slow, deliberate motion, as if her eyes, dry from fear and exhaustion, were finally allowing themselves a moment of rest. And then her ears twitched toward Benny. That's when Claire noticed something she hadn't seen before. Ember's paw, the one not bound in gauze, shifted slightly, just enough to draw her body a fraction of an inch closer to the center of the room, toward the dog. Benny didn't move. For the next 10 minutes, the room remained still, thick with tension and frost-laced silence. Then Ember, dragging herself with only her 2 front legs, made a second motion, slower this time, as if unsure whether she was dreaming or awake. Her breath came out ragged. Claire could see it fog in the cold air, but she kept going. Every inch forward seemed to take every ounce of strength she had. By the time she had half the distance between them, Benny finally responded, not with a sound. Just a soft shift of his body as he lay fully down and extended his front leg slightly closer. Claire's radio crackled. It was Lucas. "Anything?" She hesitated. "She's moving. Toward him." Lucas was quiet for a beat. "Keep going. Don't interfere." The staff watched in breathless silence as wild instinct clashed with something older than fear, recognition. At 2 feet apart, Ember stopped again. She looked directly at Benny for the first time. There was no snarl, no defensive posture, only a strange animal stillness, the kind born not of terror, but of calculation. Then, without warning, Ember collapsed. Claire's heart leapt, but it wasn't pain. Ember had curled herself into a ball, her back pressing lightly, just slightly, against Benny's outstretched paw, and for the first time since her rescue, Ember fell asleep. Not fainted, not unconscious. Her breathing slowed. Her body relaxed. Her tail gave a single twitch, then rested. On the monitors, Claire watched Ember's vitals drop into normal range. And Benny? He didn't move for hours. Not until morning. That night, something impossible had happened. Not a miracle, but something close. And it wasn't the last. By sunrise, word had spread across Pine Hollow Rescue. Volunteers whispered in disbelief. A wild bobcat, barely out of kittenhood, injured, feral, untouchable, had fallen asleep next to a dog. Not in fear, not in aggression, but in what could only be described as trust. Claire didn't want to jinx it. She stayed up most of that day watching footage from the night cameras. Ember had slept for nearly 7 hours, a full sleep cycle, rare even for healthy bobcats in captivity. When Benny stood up and quietly stretched, Ember stirred, opened one eye, and looked up, not with panic but curiosity. Then she closed it again. "Let's do a second trial," Lucas said later that day, running numbers on his tablet. "Let's place Benny in the enclosure again tonight, but this time let's track her cortisol and REM activity live." Claire nodded. "You think this is real?" "I think it's the first time she's felt safe since she was born." That night, Benny entered the enclosure just as he had before, silent, calm, deliberate. And Ember? She was already waiting by the middle wall, body low but alert, eyes scanning the door. The moment Benny appeared, she rose to her front legs and shuffled closer. No hesitation this time. Claire watched through the glass as Ember slowly leaned into Benny's side, her head pressing just beneath his ear. He didn't move, but his tail wagged, slow and steady. The equipment confirmed what their eyes saw. Ember's cortisol levels dropped by 68% within 15 minutes. Her REM sleep cycles triggered in patterns consistent with deep healing. Her heartbeat stabilized. Muscle tension reduced. But that wasn't all. Something else began to happen in the days that followed. When Benny would sit down, Ember tried mimicking the posture, clumsily at first, her back legs dragging. When Claire gave Benny a soft command, "Lie down," and he responded, Ember's ears would twitch, and she'd attempt to lower herself too, though it wasn't quite right. "She's not just healing," Claire whispered. "She's learning from him." By day 5, a rhythm formed. Benny would spend evenings inside the enclosure. Ember would eat, sleep, and stretch only when he was near. She still wouldn't allow human touch, but she let Benny lick the side of her face once, gently, after a thunderclap startled her awake. No one spoke for several seconds after witnessing that. The storm outside had passed, but something else had arrived, something even the vet couldn't define. "She's not rehabilitating," Lucas said. "She's bonding." Still, not everyone was convinced. "That bobcat's too attached," one senior volunteer warned. "What happens when the dog's not around anymore?" Claire didn't answer, because deep down she knew. That day would come, and they weren't ready for it. 2 weeks passed. Ember's wounds were healing remarkably fast. Her appetite returned. She could now drag herself halfway across the enclosure without assistance, using her strong forelegs and chest muscles. And each night, like clockwork, Benny would enter the enclosure, lie beside her, and they'd sleep, shoulder to shoulder, breath in sync. It was too perfect. And in the world of wildlife rehabilitation, too perfect often meant unsustainable. Claire knew what was coming before Lucas brought it up. "We need to assess her dependency," he said carefully, eyes fixed on Ember's recent blood work. "This can't last forever. What happens when Benny isn't here? When we try to reintroduce her to a semi-wild habitat?" Claire sighed. "She's not ready." "No," Lucas agreed. "But we have to know." That evening, the test was quietly prepared. Benny wouldn't enter the enclosure. Instead, a scent-marked plush he'd often slept with was placed near Ember's sleeping spot. A hidden speaker would play soft recordings of his breathing. Cameras would monitor her every reaction. Claire sat near the monitor the entire night, heart heavy with guilt. At first, Ember wandered the space, clearly agitated. She sniffed the plush, circled it, then backed away. The recordings played. Her ears twitched, but her body never relaxed. An hour passed, then two. By midnight, Ember began scratching at the walls, her claws slicing deep gouges into the wood. Her breathing grew fast, shallow. She cried, short, stuttered mews that no one on the staff had heard before. Not pain, not rage, something closer to heartbreak. Claire ran down the hall. When she arrived, Ember had collapsed beside the door, her body curled tight, front paws trembling. Her eyes were wild. Her chest rose too fast. Lucas's voice came over the intercom. Her vitals are spiking. Heart rate 210. She's going into acute stress response. Claire didn't wait. She opened the second enclosure gate and gave one command, "Benny, go." The golden retriever bolted forward like a flash of honey-colored light. The moment he appeared, Ember lifted her head with a sudden gasp. Her cries ceased. Benny reached her side, and she touched her nose to his, pushing herself against his chest with every bit of strength she had left. Within 3 minutes, her vitals returned to baseline. Claire's hand was still trembling when she closed the monitor panel. Lucas said nothing. He just sat down beside her, letting the silence do the talking. That night, no one else in the center slept. But inside the enclosure, beneath dim amber heat, a golden dog and a wild bobcat lay nestled together, still as snow. 3 months passed. The recovery plan shifted. Ember was officially marked non-releasable. Her injuries, while improved, left lasting damage to her hind legs. And more than that, her bond with Benny had become unbreakable. The Sanctuary Committee voted unanimously. A wild bobcat with this level of imprinting could never return to the force without suffering trauma beyond repair. Claire didn't argue. Instead, she made a decision that surprised everyone, even herself. "I'll take them both," she said one afternoon, standing before the board. "You're requesting custody of Ember and Benny?" one staff member asked. Claire nodded. "I'm not separating them. Not now. Not ever." With support from the sanctuary and after months of preparation, Claire purchased a small cedar cabin on the edge of Bridgerton National Forest, quiet, private, and surrounded by acres of fenced natural terrain. She custom-built a semi-wild enclosure with open den access, reinforced brush tunnels, and shallow platforms for Ember to climb. Benny would have free access indoors and out, as always. The transition took weeks, but Ember adapted faster than anyone expected. She would spend mornings basking in the sun-drenched clearing behind the house, head tilted toward the trees. Benny often joined, resting his chin across her shoulder. They never wrestled or played like dogs and bobcats might when young. Their affection was quieter, like old souls sharing a language they'd never been taught. But as spring gave way to summer, something else began to shift. Claire noticed Benny, who had once pulled her hiking sleds in blizzards, start to slow. His golden fur now carried hints of silver behind his ears. The long scar on his front leg, once invisible, became prominent again. His steps grew more deliberate, his eyes softer. On warm afternoons, Benny no longer ran to meet Ember in the yard. Instead, she came to him. At first, Ember simply sat near his side, watching. Then she began using her body, shoulder, cheek, even tail, to gently nudge him back onto the cooler stone slabs when he tried to lie in direct sun. She became patient. She waited when he limped. She walked when he couldn't. And then came the day Claire would never forget. It was a humid August afternoon. Thunderstorms had passed through the night before, leaving the forest floor slick and silent. Claire stepped outside and saw Benny, halfway across the clearing, frozen under the midday heat. He was panting hard, legs trembling, struggling to turn back. Before Claire could reach him, Ember was already there. The bobcat pressed her body against his chest, then did something no one had trained her to do. She used her nose to guide him, step by step, back toward the shaded area near the porch. She didn't rush. She didn't stop. And when they reached the edge, Benny collapsed into the grass, exhausted. Ember curled around him, watching, guarding. And that's when Claire realized the little bobcat they all thought needed saving had become the one doing the saving. Autumn came early that year. The trees surrounding the cabin lit up in shades of amber and fire, and the wind whispered of change. Benny no longer chased falling leaves. He watched them from the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes distant but content. He was 13 now. Claire had stopped taking him on walks. His joints ached more each week, and on colder nights he needed help getting up the stairs. But no matter how weak he grew, Ember never left his side. She adapted again. No longer needing to drag herself as often, Ember had developed a strange but effective gait, half crawl, half bounce. She could now climb short logs, rest on rocks, and even swat at the squirrels that dared approach too close. Her body had grown into adulthood, and though she would never move like other bobcats, she was powerful in her own way. She had become his mirror. As Benny aged, Ember aged with him, emotionally. Then, one night in early November, Benny didn't come outside at all. He lay curled in his soft bed near the wood-burning stove, chest rising unevenly, each breath shallow. Claire sat nearby, stroking his ears, whispering nonsense through tears she didn't try to hide. And Ember? She stood at the back door. She had never crossed the threshold, never stepped past the invisible line between wilderness and warmth. The bobcat had always chosen the porch, the trees, the moonlight. But that night, she walked inside, silent, focused. She padded across the wood floor, claws clicking gently with each uneven step, until she reached Benny. Then carefully she lowered herself beside him, pressing her head into his neck, just as he had done for her once, long ago. She didn't sleep. She stayed alert, watching. The hours passed slowly, and the fire dimmed. At dawn, Claire rose from her chair, only to find that Benny had passed, peacefully without pain, his eyes half open as if still watching over his home. Ember didn't move. She lay beside his body all morning, breathing slow and steady, eyes never leaving his face. Claire let her stay, the back door left open, wind rustling the last of the maple leaves outside. It wasn't until evening that Ember rose. She padded toward the porch on her own and looked back once, just once, before disappearing into the dusk. And for the first time since the day Benny saved her, she walked without leaning on anyone. The weeks that followed were quiet. Claire spent most mornings alone on the porch, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the forest line. The silence was strange, not empty, just different. Ember still visited, but never for long. She came at sunrise, sat on the same flat rock Benny once loved, and left before noon. She didn't sleep in the enclosure anymore, didn't curl up by the back door. She had returned to the wild, at least partly, but not fully, because something tethered her still. And that something returned one rainy morning in early spring. Claire was chopping firewood near the shed when she heard it, a sound so soft, so unfamiliar, it took her a moment to process it, a whimper. High-pitched, desperate. She turned sharply, rain sliding down her sleeves. The sound came again from the edge of the woods. Claire dropped the axe and ran. Near the roots of an old cedar, half hidden beneath wet leaves and shivering, was a wolf pup. No more than 3 months old, its front paw caught in what looked like a homemade steel trap, rusted, illegal, vicious. The pup's eyes were wide with terror, body twitching, breast shallow. Claire's heart froze, but before she could reach for her gloves, a shadow moved from behind the tree line. It was Ember. She stepped forward slowly, ears perked, body lowered, not in fear but in careful calm. Claire held her breath as the bobcat approached the pup, sniffed once, then lowered her body, curled around the tiny creature like a sheltering dome. Rain soaked them both, but neither moved. Claire didn't dare interrupt. Only after several minutes did Ember lift her head, meeting Claire's eyes across the clearing. That night the wolf pup was safely moved to the indoor kennel, sedated, bandaged, monitored. Ember remained by his side, not because she had to, because she chose to. And later that week Claire watched from the hallway camera as the wolf pup stirred in sleep, whimpering, twitching. Ember, now strong, steady, fully grown, placed her body close and pressed her cheek to his neck, just like Benny had done for her. The cycle had turned. A bobcat once saved by a dog had returned the favor, without words, without training, without obligation. Just instinct, just love, just memory. And under the fading glow of the moon, Claire whispered to herself, "You kept him alive, Ember, and now you're passing it on." Months passed. The wolf pup, now named Scout, grew stronger with each week. His injured paw healed, though he always walked with a slight limp. But that didn't stop him from racing across the fence glade behind the cabin, tail high, tongue flapping, joy in every awkward stride. And always, not far behind, came Ember. They weren't like typical animals raised together. They didn't tumble or chase. Ember still carried a deep calm in her bones, the kind that had come from loss, from long nights watching someone else fade away. But she watched over Scout with the patience of a guardian. On stormy nights, she curled beside his kennel without being asked. On windy days, she led him to the hollowed log near the eastern slope, where the gusts died down. And every morning, before the world stirred, they lay together on the sun-worn rock where Benny once slept. Claire watched it all with quiet awe. She knew what it meant to witness this kind of bond. Not friendship, not parenting, something more elusive, a continuation. Because the more time passed, the more Ember began to resemble the dog who had once saved her. Not in shape, not in sound, but in soul. She moved slower now. Not because of age, but because she matched Scout's pace. She shared food she once would have hoarded. She gave up shade for him. She stood between him and the wind. But it was one quiet evening in early autumn that sealed the truth. Claire had just finished tending to the garden when she spotted something on the porch. Ember, sitting tall, her fur glistening in the amber dusk. And beside her, what made Claire's heart catch was Scout, lying still, resting his head exactly where Benny once rested his, on Ember's shoulder. They were facing the yard, silent, watching the shadows lengthen. Two creatures from different worlds, one born of teeth and snow, one born in a trap, nearly forgotten. Claire stepped back, not wanting to break the moment. Inside the cabin, the wooden floor still creaked where Benny used to walk. His red harness still hung by the back door. Nothing had been removed, because Benny wasn't gone, not entirely. He lived in the way Ember watched over Scout, in the way she stood still when thunder rolled, in the way she refused to sleep alone. That night, as the first cold breeze of October drifted through the trees, Claire sat beside the window and wrote 6 words in the corner of her journal. He saved her. She remembered how. Snow came early that winter. By the first week of November, the meadow behind the cabin had transformed into a sea of white silence. Scout, though still young, had grown enough to bound through the drifts, leaving crooked paw prints behind. Ember followed, her movements deliberate, slower now. Not from pain, but from memory. Claire sometimes caught her stopping at the old stone slab, the one warmed by sun in spring and haunted by silence in winter. She'd sit there alone for long stretches, amber eyes scanning the tree line. Not searching, remembering. Scout would join her, and when he did, she'd nudge him gently the way Benny once nudged her. But it wasn't until the anniversary of Benny's passing, the exact date 1 year prior, that something strange happened. Claire awoke before dawn to find the back door pushed open. Snow tracked across the porch. She stepped outside, tightening her coat. The air was sharp, still full of unspoken things. Then she saw them. 2 sets of tracks led across the meadow, one bobcat, one wolf. They moved side by side in near-perfect unison, down the slope and toward the old cedar grove where Ember had once shielded Scout. Claire followed quietly, heart beating faster with each step. And there, in the clearing beneath the ghost-gray sky, she saw them, standing before a 3rd set of paw prints, barely visible beneath the fresh snow. Golden retriever prints. Benny's. Faded, weathered, but unmistakable. They hadn't been there the night before. Claire knelt, running her gloved fingers over the outline. She blinked hard against the tears freezing in her lashes. Ember didn't look at her. She didn't need to. She simply stepped forward and lowered herself beside the ghost of her old friend's path. Scout did the same, mirroring her exactly, and together, under falling snow, they kept vigil. For memory, for love, for the one who taught them both that healing wasn't about returning to what you were, but learning to carry the broken pieces with grace. That night, Claire lit a candle and placed it by the back window. The flame flickered, casting warm light on Benny's old harness, On a photograph pinned beside it, Ember is a young cub, eyes hollow, and Benny lying beside her, steady as ever. She smiled, because now the story had come full circle, and somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the snow, footprints walked side by side, visible only to those who knew where to look. Not a miracle, but something close. Spring returned as it always does. The snow melted slowly across the valley, revealing muddy trails and brittle grass, and with it came new sounds, birds waking, small creatures stirring, water trickling through once frozen creeks. But something else stirred too, something quieter, deeper. Scout had grown into a striking young wolf. His once thin limbs had filled out. His stride, though still marked by the slight limp, was confident, bold. He could climb to the ridgeline in minutes, howl into the wind, and be heard for miles. But he always came back. To her. Ember had aged. Not drastically, but enough for Claire to see it in her eyes, in the stiffness of her steps, and the way she no longer tried to climb the logs or leap from stone to stone. She had become the center now, the anchor. The one who stayed behind while others wandered. Still, she watched Scout's every move with silent approval. And then, one evening in May, Claire returned from town with supplies to find something new waiting on her porch. A small bundle of fur, eyes barely open, ears folded, a coyote pup, no more than 2 weeks old, tucked beneath Ember's curled body. Claire froze. She checked the perimeter fence. No breaches, no signs of other coyotes, nothing in the cameras. But Ember had him, and she wouldn't let go. Claire knelt slowly, voice soft. "Where did you find him, girl?" Ember didn't blink. She simply placed her paw over the pup gently, possessively, like a mother protecting her child. It was the same look she had given Scout years ago, the same look Benny had once given her. The message was clear. Another soul had been found. Another life was being passed forward. Claire called Lucas the next morning. "There's another one," she said. "But this time it wasn't us who rescued him." Lucas was quiet. "Then you're saying the Bobcat—" She brought him home. 3 generations of rescue. Not by blood, not by species, not by any rule of nature, but by the legacy of kindness that started with one injured dog who sat beside a terrified Bobcat years ago in the cold corner of a cage. That ripple had become a wave, and that wave had become a circle. Scout lay beside the coyote pup every night now. And Ember? She watched from her sunlit rock, head held high, eyes soft with memory. Her body was slower, yes. Her time was shorter now, but her story, their story, would keep walking long after her paws stopped. And somewhere beyond the trees the wind carried a scent only she understood. The scent of golden fur, of warmth, of loyalty that never left. The scent of Benny. And Ember closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in peace.